You won't believe what this poor girl went through on her wedding day in Lagos. While other brides smiled with joy, Amara cried through her veil, her tears soaking the fabric that was borrowed from her neighbor. Around her, whispers and laughter filled the air. Some guests pointed at her husband, a poor driver named Obinna, and laughed louder. "Look at her," one woman said, "marrying a driver when her stepsister is marrying a manager." But no one knew the truth hiding behind that steering wheel. Amara's life hadn't always been this way. When her father was alive, their home was filled with warmth and love. But after his death, her stepmother, Madame Ruth, took control. Greedy and heartless, Ruth sold most of her husband's properties and treated Amara like a servant. She made Amara cook, clean, and even wash her stepsister's clothes, all while planning something much darker. When the company where her late husband once worked announced that a new, rich manager was taking over, Ruth saw an opportunity. She wanted her own daughter, Chioma, to marry the manager and climb the social ladder. So when the company's driver, Obinna, came to deliver documents one afternoon, Ruth made a cruel plan. "Amara, since you're not useful for anything else, you'll marry this driver," she said. Amara's heart broke that day. She tried to protest, but Ruth threatened to throw her out of the house. And just like that, within weeks, Amara was forced into a small, pitiful wedding. No music, no friends, just whispers and humiliation. As the guests mocked her and her groom, Amara's heart whispered a single question: "God, is this my destiny?" But fate was already writing another chapter, one that would shock everyone in Lagos. That night after the wedding, Lagos felt colder than ever. The noise of the city faded as Amara sat quietly beside her new husband, Obinna, in an old taxi he borrowed from a friend. The headlights flickered, the air smelled of dust and diesel, and the silence between them was heavier than words. Amara's eyes were swollen from crying. She couldn't believe her life had come to this, married to a man everyone called the driver boy. Obinna glanced at her through the rearview mirror. He could see the pain in her eyes, and it tore at his heart. "Amara," he said softly, "I know you didn't choose this. I know what they made you believe about me. But I promise you something, one day, you'll smile again. One day, you'll see that this was never a mistake." His voice carried a strange confidence, but Amara didn't understand it. To her, he was just a driver, trying to comfort his sad bride. They arrived at a tiny apartment in a quiet area of Surulere. The room had only one bed, a flickering bulb, and a small fan that groaned with every spin. As Amara unpacked her few belongings, she tried to fight back tears. She thought about her stepsister, Chioma, who was probably at that very moment taking pictures in her lavish wedding hall, wearing gold jewelry and smiling beside her rich manager. The pain cut deep, but Amara still bowed her head and whispered, "God, please help me endure this." Days turned into weeks. Obinna woke early every morning, wearing the same old shirt, and left for work. But every evening, he returned with a small gift, sometimes a loaf of bread, sometimes a pack of noodles, sometimes just a smile. He never raised his voice, never complained. Slowly, Amara began to notice something different about him. His manners, his calmness, his way of speaking. He didn't talk like a regular driver. He spoke with wisdom, and sometimes even authority. One night, as they sat under the dim light eating together, Obinna looked at her and said, "Amara, people may mock you now, but remember, the story doesn't end where pain begins." Amara's heart trembled. There was something in his eyes that gave her peace, something that made her wonder, who really is this man I married? But Lagos had a way of revealing secrets when you least expect them. Weeks passed, and slowly, life began to settle into a quiet routine. Lagos moved on, as it always does, but something about Obinna began to change. Though he still drove his old taxi and dressed simply, small hints started to appear, details Amara couldn't ignore. One evening, while cleaning their small room, she found a sleek black phone hidden in a drawer. It wasn't the kind of phone drivers could afford. When she accidentally pressed the side button, the screen lit up with a company logo, Okafor Holdings. Amara froze. That was her late father's old company, the same company her stepmother always talked about. Why did Obinna have anything connected to them? Before she could think further, Obinna walked in. He smiled gently, took the phone, and said, "Some things are not what they seem, Amara. Trust me, okay?" His calmness only deepened her curiosity. Days later, something else happened. A man came to their door neatly dressed, driving a shiny car. Amara watched from behind the curtain as Obinna greeted him with warmth. But instead of treating Obinna like a driver, the man spoke to him with respect, even bowed slightly, before leaving. That night, Amara couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed the scene over and over again. "Why would a rich man respect my husband like that?" she whispered to herself. Then came the most shocking part one morning. Obinna told her he needed to travel for official matters. He handed her some cash, told her to buy anything she needed, and left in a car she'd never seen before. It wasn't his taxi, it was a black SUV with tinted windows and security men following behind. Amara's heart skipped a beat. Something was not adding up. Who was this man really? When Obinna returned 3 days later, he looked tired, but fulfilled. He smiled and said, "Amara, never measure a man by what he wears or drives. True worth is often hidden." Then he kissed her forehead gently, like a promise. For the first time, Amara smiled genuinely. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to this marriage than pain. But far away, in the same city, her stepmother Ruth and stepsister Chioma were planning a grand party with the so-called rich manager. And what was meant to be their victory was about to become their greatest humiliation. Back in Ikea, Madame Ruth's mansion was alive with laughter and gossip. Every corner smelled of wealth and pride. Chioma, Ruth's beloved daughter, strutted around the house in silk gowns, flashing the engagement ring her rich manager had given her. "Can you imagine?" she'd boast to her friends. "My sister married a driver, but I'm marrying a manager." Life truly knows how to pick favorites. And every time Ruth heard that, her chest swelled with satisfaction. But beneath Amara's silence, something powerful was growing. She didn't seek revenge, she didn't argue, and she didn't boast. Instead, she worked hard. Every morning, she swept their small compound, prepared breakfast, and saw Obinna off with a quiet smile. In her heart, peace was slowly replacing the pain. Yet, deep inside, curiosity burned. Who exactly was this man she called her husband? One afternoon, while on her way to the market, Amara overheard two women whispering near a shop. "Have you seen that driver who lives in Surulere?" one said. "I heard he's not what he seems." The other replied, "My cousin works for Okafor Holdings. She said there's a secret boss, young, humble, and always disguised. Maybe it's that man." Amara stopped walking. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely breathe. Could they be talking about Obinna? That night, she couldn't hide her thoughts any longer. As Obinna came home, she looked at him with trembling eyes. "Tell me the truth," she said softly. "Who are you, really?" He smiled, then looked away. "Amara," he said, "sometimes the truth is better revealed at the right time. And when that time comes, everyone will know." Amara said nothing more. She trusted him even though the mystery around him grew deeper every day. But what she didn't know was that a storm was already gathering, one that would shake the foundations of everything her stepmother thought she controlled. Across town, Chioma's rich manager was beginning to show his true colors. He borrowed money, lied about business deals, and whispered excuses every time he failed to keep his promises. Ruth started noticing inconsistencies. "Why are you always broke?" she snapped one evening. The man only smiled and said, "Don't worry, my darling. Everything will fall into place." But destiny was already arranging the pieces. The mansion that once echoed with laughter had grown quiet. The gold chandeliers still sparkled, but the joy beneath them had faded. Chioma's dream marriage was falling apart faster than anyone could have imagined. Her rich manager, Daniel, was not the man he claimed to be. He spent most nights outside, came home drunk, and argued with her over money. The same people who once envied Chioma now whispered behind her back. "The manager is broke," they said. "That family's wealth is just a story." Ruth began to panic. She had built her pride on her daughter's marriage, the very thing that was now cracking. One morning, she barged into Daniel's office at the company, demanding answers. "You promised to take care of my daughter," she shouted. But Daniel, tired and cornered, finally snapped. "Madam, I'm not the owner of this company. I'm just an employee, a manager who reports to the real boss." Ruth froze. "What do you mean?" she asked, trembling. Daniel smirked. "Ask the driver who used to work here. He knows more than you think." Meanwhile, Amara's life was quietly changing. Obinna had started traveling, more often, but every time he returned, he brought her something special. Not jewelry or money, but peace and assurance. He began renovating their small home, painting the walls, fixing the fan, even buying her a new phone. Amara was confused. "Obinna, where is all this money coming from?" she asked. He only smiled. "From hard work and the grace of God." His humility made her love him even more, but deep down, she felt something bigger was at play. One Saturday, Amara received a call. The number was unknown. When she answered, a man's voice said, "Good afternoon, Ma. Please, this is Okafor Holdings. We'd like to confirm if you'll be attending the upcoming shareholders' dinner with your husband." Amara's mouth went dry. "Shareholders' dinner?" she repeated. Stunned, the man replied, "Yes, Ma. Mr. Obinna Okafor personally requested your presence." Before she could ask anything, the line went dead. She sat in silence, her heart racing. Obinna Okafor? That was her father's company name, the one her stepmother had always spoken about with envy. Could her husband be related to it, or even be the real owner? The puzzle pieces were finally beginning to fit together, but the picture they formed would change everything. That evening, Amara sat on the edge of her bed, her heart racing. The name, Obinna Okafor, echoed in her head like a bell she couldn't silence. Could her husband really be connected to Okafor Holdings, the same company her late father once worked for? The same company her stepmother worshipped like a god? It felt impossible. She wanted to ask him again, but part of her was afraid of the answer. When Obinna came home later that night, dressed in his usual plain shirt, Amara finally gathered the courage. "Obinna," she whispered, "who are you really?" He stopped, turned slowly, and looked into her eyes. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, with a faint smile, he replied, "The truth will always come, Amara. And when it does, it will speak louder than my words ever could." He touched her cheek gently, kissed her forehead, and walked to the window, staring into the Lagos night. Something about his tone told Amara that the time for secrets was running out. Days passed. The city buzzed with rumors that the mysterious owner of Okafor Holdings was returning to Lagos from abroad, a man no one had ever truly seen, one who had inherited the empire but lived a simple life away from the spotlight. Ruth and Chioma couldn't stop talking about him. "Maybe he'll attend the company dinner," Chioma said excitedly. "If he's not married, I'll make sure he notices me." Ruth laughed. "That's my girl. Forget Amara and her driver husband, our time is just beginning." But destiny had its own plans. The day of the shareholders' dinner arrived. Amara was nervous, as Obinna insisted she wear the elegant gown he had quietly bought for her weeks ago, a royal blue dress that shimmered like the Lagos lagoon under sunlight. When she saw herself in the mirror, tears filled her eyes. "I've never looked like this before," she whispered. Obinna smiled softly. "Tonight, you'll see the world differently." They entered the hall at Eco Hotels. The chandeliers sparkled, the cameras flashed, and guests murmured in admiration. But when Obinna walked in, the whispers changed. Some stood, others froze. Daniel, Chioma's husband, nearly choked on his drink. Ruth's eyes widened as she clutched her purse. That's him," someone gasped. "That's the owner, Mr. Obinna Okafor." Ruth turned slowly toward the stage and saw her poor driver son-in-law walking confidently to the podium. The world she had built on pride began to crumble beneath her feet. The hall went silent. Every whisper, every breath, stopped as Obinna, the man they once called a poor driver, stood before the crowd, holding the microphone. His presence filled the room, calm, confident, and dressed in a tailored black suit. He no longer looked like the man who drove a dusty taxi through Lagos streets. He looked like what he truly was, a king in his own world. "Good evening, everyone," Obinna began, his voice deep and steady. "For years, many of you have heard about the mysterious owner of Okafor Holdings. Tonight, I thought it's time to stop the whispers." He smiled slightly, glancing at Amara, whose trembling hands clutched her gown. "I am Obinna Okafor, son of late Chief Okafor, and yes, I started from the driver's seat. I wanted to understand how people treat those they think are beneath them. Tonight, I've seen enough." A gasp spread through the crowd. The same people who once mocked him now stared in awe. Cameras flashed, and phones recorded every word. But the most stunned face in the room belonged to Madame Ruth. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Chioma, beside her, looked pale. "Mama, that's Amara's husband," she whispered. Ruth's hands shook violently as she held her chest. No, it can't be," she muttered. But it was. Obinna turned his eyes toward their table. "Some people," he continued, "believed they were too good to respect others. They mocked my wife, Amara, for marrying a driver. But that driver was me testing hearts, not status." The hall erupted in murmurs. Amara, overwhelmed, could only cry. Not tears of pain this time, but of pride and relief. Ruth could no longer sit. She stood, trembling, and walked slowly toward the stage. my son-in-law," she stammered. "Please, forgive me. I didn't know who you were." But Obinna looked at her calmly. "You didn't need to know who I was," he said gently. "You just needed to be kind." His words pierced through her like lightning. Chioma fell to her knees beside her mother, sobbing. Daniel, her so-called rich manager, slipped quietly toward the exit, his lies finally exposed. The cameras caught everything. It was the night when the proud were humbled and the humble were lifted. Amara, still standing at the edge of the hall, looked at her husband in awe. For the first time, she understood what he meant when he said, "The story doesn't end where pain begins." The next morning, Lagos woke up to the news like wildfire. Every blog, every radio station, every gossip group was saying the same thing. The poor driver was the real owner of Okafor Holdings. People who once mocked Amara now spoke her name with admiration. But while the city buzzed, one house fell into unbearable silence. Madame Ruth's mansion. Ruth sat in her living room, eyes swollen from crying. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing, but she couldn't pick up. Everyone who used to praise her was now laughing behind her back. "Can you imagine?" one friend said over the phone. "She forced her stepdaughter to marry a driver, and now that driver is her boss." The words burned her pride like acid. Chioma, too, sat quietly, staring at the floor. "Mama," she whispered, "what are we going to do now?" Ruth sighed heavily. "We'll go to him. We'll beg." Meanwhile, in Obinna and Amara's home, peace finally felt real. Amara woke up to find her husband reading quietly by the window. Sunlight kissed his face, and for the first time, she saw him not as a driver, not even as a billionaire, but as the man who chose humility over pride. She walked to him, tears in her eyes. "You knew they would mock you," she said softly, "but you still stayed humble." Obinna smiled and took her hand. "Amara, sometimes God allows us to be humiliated, so he can later honor us in front of those who laughed." That same afternoon, a knock came at their door. When Amara opened it, her stepmother Ruth stood there, her once proud face now covered in shame. She fell to her knees immediately. "Amara, my daughter, please forgive me. I was blind with greed. I didn't see your value until it was too late." Chioma knelt beside her, crying. "Sister, I'm sorry too. I mocked you when I should have loved you." Tears rolled down Amara's cheeks. Her heart pounded painfully. Every memory of abuse, every insult, every humiliation came flooding back. Obinna stood quietly behind her, saying nothing. Amara knelt down too, not in pride, but in grace. She lifted her stepmother's hands and whispered, "I forgive you, Mama, not because you deserve it, but because peace is more powerful than pain. Ruth wept uncontrollably, hugging her. Thank you, my daughter. May God bless you forever. Even Chioma held Amara tightly, sobbing. Obinna watched the scene quietly, his eyes glistening. That day, 3 broken hearts finally found healing, and the walls of pride fell to dust. Weeks passed, and Lagos began to move on from the story that had shaken the city. Yet, for Amara, every morning felt like a new beginning. She no longer woke up to tears or fear, she woke up to peace. Her small apartment had now become a home, filled with laughter, prayers, and quiet gratitude. But beyond all the luxury that could now be hers, Amara chose simplicity. She never forgot where she came from, or how God had lifted her from shame to grace. Ruth and Chioma had sold their mansion to pay off debts Daniel had left behind before fleeing Lagos. They now lived modestly, sharing a small rented house on the mainland. But something inside them had changed. Gone was the arrogance that once defined them. Ruth began volunteering at a women's center, helping widows and young girls. I used to look down on people like you, she would tell them. But life taught me that pride builds walls where love should stand. Chioma started teaching in a small nursery school, learning the value of patience and humility. They both vowed never to mock anyone again. One sunny afternoon, Ruth and Chioma were invited to Okafor Holdings' annual charity event. They almost refused out of shame, but Amara personally called and begged them to come. It's not about the past, she said. It's about healing. When they arrived, the grand hall was filled with children, widows, and struggling families, all beneficiaries of Obinna's new foundation. Ruth couldn't hold back her tears. He's using his wealth to lift others, she whispered. The same wealth I once worshipped. As the program went on, Obinna took the stage. Today, he announced, we are opening a new training center for young women, a place where they can learn skills, rebuild their lives, and find hope again. The crowd clapped warmly. Then he turned to Ruth and Chioma, seated in the front row. This center, he continued, will be named the Amara Home of Hope, in honor of the woman who chose forgiveness over revenge. The hall erupted in applause. Ruth covered her face and wept uncontrollably. Amara, overwhelmed, looked at her husband, through tears. You didn't have to do this, she whispered. Obinna smiled. No, my love. The world needs to see what grace can build after pride has fallen. That night, as the lights dimmed and people danced, Ruth hugged Amara and said softly, You gave me a second chance at life. Amara smiled through tears. We all got one, Mama. Lagos streets were alive with their usual chaos, motorcycles honking, street vendors shouting, cars weaving through traffic when a sudden roar broke through the noise. People stopped in their tracks. A black convoy of luxury cars, tinted windows gleaming in the sun, rolled down the road, moving slowly but powerfully. The crowd parted automatically, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. At the center of the convoy was Obinna, driving a sleek black car. Gone was the dusty taxi. Gone were the humble clothes. He wore a tailored suit, his posture commanding respect. The same streets that once mocked him, where whispers and laughter had followed Amara and him on their wedding day, were now witnesses to a man reborn in truth and honor. People whispered, gasped, and pointed. That's him! That's the driver who owns the company! Someone exclaimed. Amara stood on the balcony of their new home, tears streaming down her cheeks. She remembered the day she cried through her simple wedding, humiliated by the very people now staring in awe. But today, she was no longer the helpless girl. She held Obinna's hand, smiling through the tears, and whispered, This is our victory. Below, Madame Ruth and Chioma stood frozen, their mouths open in shock. Ruth fell to her knees again, hands clasped together. Amara, please forgive me. I was blind with greed. Obinna looked at her calmly. You've already been forgiven, Ruth. Humility is what rebuilds broken hearts. The convoy stopped in front of the mansion, and Obinna stepped out, walking slowly toward the crowd. Cameras flashed, children cheered, and strangers bowed in respect. People who had laughed at Amara now stared in awe at the man they once thought was poor. Ruth and Chioma watched, humbled, as Obinna's generosity and character shone brighter than any wealth could. Amara's quiet strength had been rewarded, and the city learned a lesson they would never forget. Never judge by appearances, and always value the heart over the title. That night, Lagos buzzed with stories of the driver who became a king. But for Amara, Obinna, and even Ruth and Chioma, it was more than a story. It was a reminder that grace, patience, and forgiveness can change destinies. The streets that once mocked them now celebrated them. And in that celebration, a family, once broken by greed and pride, found its peace. Imagine being in Amara's shoes. Would you forgive those who humiliated you? Comment below with your answer, and let us know. Could you have chosen grace over revenge? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button